Start. Okay. Well, so today we're talking about, kind of continuing the series. We're talking today a lot about how we build this trust or influence. I'm calling it more influence. I put trust here, but talking about how we build influence without authority. Um, so let's get into it. About me, I feel like a broken record because I say this every week, but I've been doing data analytics now for 18 years. I started my career in Australia, and then at the age of 25, decided that Australia wasn't necessarily for me. So I moved back to Canada, and that's where my met my wife and spent 10 years there before. 4 years ago, we decided, hey, let's get out of here. The maturity of data in Canada wasn't that great, and we said, why don't we try something different? And we ended up in Germany, and that's where I've been able to kind of gather a lot more insights about the market. So right now I'm the VP of Data Analytics at Zeal Network, which is a German lottery company, but I've got experience in e-commerce. I was at Wayfair before. If you check out profile, I've done some prop tech, fintech, wealth management for about a decade, some gaming. I'm also IECL, so International Executive Coaching, something certified executive coach. So that's really my passion, is this coaching on the side and helping kind of get people to figure it out on their own. So sharing here is a start of that process. And today I'm at the Zeal office. Instead, normally I'm at home, but today I was at the office. And so you can see the background. It's slightly different than normal. So what we'll focus on today is four kind of key elements, right? I want us to be able to walk out of here knowing how to lead without this element of titles. It is easy when you are a leader to tell your people what to do. It's much harder when you're a leader to tell your peers what to do and how to get them to play the way that you want them to play. So we're talking about influence. We'll create a kind of show you a little bit of a system of visibility that'll help you kind of become a little bit more impossible to ignore, we can call it, and some small habits that we can do. So every kind of phase that we go through, I'll say things that you can do today so you can walk out of here with some things that will help you. And then finally, oh, actually, AI did not cover that. We will not do point four. I apologize. Ultimately, the big point here is that trust isn't built through hierarchy. To me, trust and influence is built through reliability, clarity, and follow through, right? And so if you think about in the last month, how many times did you have the right insight as a leader, but you just couldn't get it across the line, right? And that's what we're trying to solve today, or talk about how we can solve that for you, is how do we get that insight to land and to take that next step? So, as always, I always like to start off with why do we struggle? And so with influence, we often struggle because, we've been taught to convince people with more data. Oh, you don't agree with me? Great. Here's more data that proves that I'm correct. Here's another graph that shows that this is the right decision. Here's another piece of insight. Here's another report. Here's another thing, right? And that's the way that we've always been kind of taught how to bring that up. But in reality, people don't want more data. They want to understand why it matters to them. We often also do a really good job of either flooding them with a ton of information or we ghost them. I know many of the leaders that I've coached in the past or worked with in the past, it's like they're there when it's great, but when there's a data quality issue or a governance issue or something's not going to plan on the project, you don't hear from them. And as a result, you lose that credibility. And then finally, we often wait for authority. We've kind of always been brought up, especially as a service provider in data, to kind of wait until the real leaders make a decision. But in reality, we are real leaders, and we do belong at the table, and we should take initiative to drive those forward. So we'll talk a little bit about building trust. And so the big piece takeaway here is next time you're tempted to add another chart, another piece of analysis, flip your thought and start a sentence with "this matters because." All right, change that narrative to align. So today, influence for me is about three things: predictability, integrity, and clarity. And so when you're predictable and people know what to expect from you, high quality work, a consistent approach to things, follow through, that it starts the foundation. Then you add in the integrity. You do what you say you're going to do, right? You're, again, reliable. You know that they know that you're going to own when things go well and when things go bad. And three, clarity. You're making their life a little bit easier. You're speaking their language. You're giving them information that helps them. And so between those three things, you start to build that influence, which is what we're all after. So to me, influence has nothing to do with title. It has everything to do with the way that you operate as a data leader. And so this is where this flywheel comes in. And we're going to talk about the flywheel a few times today. For me, influence is a flywheel. And so for those of you that are familiar, flywheel, I think was invented by Spotify. Basically, the concept being that once it starts moving, it starts to get momentum and it keeps going. And as it keeps going, it compounds and compounds and compounds, right? And so we've also used that. So for me here, flywheel starts off with visibility. People see your work. You start off with getting people to see what you're doing. Then once people start to see you're doing, they're seeing that you're reliably following through and that you're consistent in your approach, which then builds that credibility that you have with them. So you're now they will start to believe you more because they're seeing in the stuff you're doing. They know that you're trustworthy. Now they start to believe your credibility, which starts to get some influence, which means that people are doing stuff with the recommendations you're doing. And that goes back into more visibility because people are talking about you, you're getting more visibility, which leads to more reliability because you're consistent in your approach and the flywheel spins. So a really good example of that is the idea of sharing an early draft, maybe with a stakeholder or a customer. You then follow up on some of the actions that you discussed in that, which makes you reliable. Then you start, over time, peers start trusting you because they were part of the process in some way, or at least they were kind of consulted. And then they start to act on those insights or share your insights in the company. And then that cycle continues. All right. So we'll go through all four of these in a little bit more detail here in a second. But to me, flywheel is really what we're after. We want to get that wheel spinning a little bit to get that momentum. And so let's start with visibility. Big first one, oftentimes we hide a little bit or we think that we're being visible, but in reality, we don't really do a good job as data leaders about selling our impact to the business. And I don't call it bragging. I think we do need to kind of brag a little bit about the things that we do and the value that we create. But this first part is getting as much of that visibility out there as possible. So some of the things that I do and some of the things that I recommend for you to do is start what I call as a signal routine. And so this is just communicating a couple summaries either in a team, a cross-functional channel. Maybe it's just in a general channel. Maybe your company has a Monday morning meeting or some sort of newsletter they send out. Just get involved in that by sending a quick post. Hey, this is something that we found. This is what it means, and this is what we're doing next. Right? Again, it doesn't have to be very big. It doesn't have to be formal. It could just be something either informally to a peer of yours, maybe someone that you're trying to get some buy-in in the company. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It could be just like, hey, last week I was at a conference and I heard this. I think that's really relevant to your area. And if you want me to connect you with that person, let me know. All right. It's a signal routine. You're just starting to think about how do I communicate out with that person. Now they see you as a trusted partner or start to see you as a trusted partner because we're starting that flywheel. Share what you've done before you're done. So we often wait for perfect. We often wait for everything to be finished and all lined up and having cross-checked it 12 times. But a lot of the times, your stakeholder is just happy to be, hey, this is where we're at right now. Have a look at this. Just give me your thoughts at a high level. I often just run ideas through my peers with them and say, look, I'm thinking about this. What are you thinking about? And go down that way. Yeah, Nikki, you have a question? Go for it.
Yeah. One thing that I've seen come up in discussing data communication is the importance of consistency, that
Mhm.
a number changing can be really disconcerting to a non-data analyst.
Yep.
When you share drafts, how do you communicate that there is still data work to do, that these numbers as themselves should not be taken as gospel?
Yeah, I mean, great. I mean, it all comes down to how you frame your question in that, in my opinion. So if I'm not asking you to vet my numbers in this case, I'm saying, hey, this is kind of where we seem to be leaning in this direction. Does that sit well with you? Is that kind of what your gut's telling you? Because I mean, again, if you spend another 2 weeks refining it and then you present to them and they're like, this is garbage. I don't believe in this. What's the
Mm,
difference, right? So I think at a certain point, just getting ahead and saying, hey, we're starting to see this pattern. The numbers we're not 100% confident on yet, but this is where it's starting to lean. What do you think?
mm,
Um, and so you're kind of putting that caveat ahead of time, or at least saying, hey, don't worry about the numbers right now, but this is kind of what we're thinking as a potential recommendation, things like that.
got
So
it.
that's,
Thank you.
yeah, I guess them ahead of time. The third point here, and by the way, thank you for the question. No one ever asks questions while I'm talking. This is fantastic. So if you have more, please do. Visualize it for them. So obviously things that we think are relevant to us, we're data people. We play in the data all day. We often look at numbers all day, but my marketing counterpart spends more of their time looking at advertising campaigns and the latest video that we're going to put up on the internet. And so for them, they don't really look at numbers that often. They should, but they probably do it 20% of their time versus we're in there 90% of our time. So really think about how do you turn that into an easier understanding. I'm a big believer that if you can do that graph in 2 seconds, that's way more powerful than here's a table of all the data and there's a number at the bottom that I bolded for you. And then use existing channels. I think there's things that are already in those channels. Creating new channels or creating new ways of communicating is also makes it hard. There's a lot of channels you might have in your Slack already if you're using Teams. If your company is an email first company, or if you live in Germany, we're fax first, so you can send your fax findings. You'll hit the people where they're used to getting their information. So my message here is put the information where people go and not have to force them to go find it. And so one of the things you'll notice here again is that you just start getting added to things. You stop having to defend your projects. People start to talk about your work. So just some quick tips on the right. When we go into the next one, reliability is, I think, what you talked about a little bit there around consistency. So for us here, for me, people care more about the fact that you do things consistently, not that you're always brilliant in that approach, right? And so I think here, for me, sometimes you share, I don't have a perfect update yet. Hey, I don't really know where we're going with this yet. Hey, we're still thinking about the play to do here. That's better than saying silent and having the stakeholder go, I wonder if he's working on my project or not. I wonder if they're actually getting somewhere with this, right? Because they'll sit there and human nature is that we think the worst. We think, oh, Pierre's distracted. He's definitely not going to do it. Maybe I'm working on it. I just haven't told you. And so here, what I recommend and what I do is I try to as much as possible to, and I set up calendar reminders for this, but setting out specifically different stakeholders, different updates on different days. So maybe I send out a general update to my data team. I manage managers now, so I send a weekly update to the team about what's going on our plate or what's kind of coming in the mind of the executives. I also then communicate with my stakeholders on certain days where I tell them, hey, this is where we're at with your project, or this is where we're thinking about going next. So I keep that consistent cadence with them so they know they're going to get something from me every week, whether that's a written touch point, maybe a verbal one in the hallway, maybe I set up a quick catch-up meeting, but they'll get something from me. So I'm consistent. After every kind of interaction, I try as much as possible, especially if there's a takeaway, just to close that loop. That also helps me to go back and say, hey, we agreed on this, or hey, this is what we're doing next. And then that kind of gives me already my next touch point that I'm going to talk to them about. So if we talked and we agreed to something, maybe next Monday I reach out again and say, hey, didn't forget about what we talked about last week, still working on it, going to give you an update on Wednesday, right? So then it shows that you're kind of proactive and that builds that trust, right? Trust helps build influence. I flag things early. A lot of times people try to hide until it's perfect, but we're 2 days behind is not a bad thing, or hey, we need to adjust this, or we hit a snag. Just wanted to give you a heads up. Nothing I need, you don't need to do anything. We're on top of it, but we'll be a day late or something. Again, these are all things that are normal in our day to day, and they kind of build that trust. So nothing better than being ahead of it than having to surprise them. And then obviously small wins fast. So people always ask for something right away. I think we have this tendency in data to say, let me build this perfect product. Give me 3 weeks. Can we get them something within a day or two, 3 days, even just to start directionally talking that conversation? It goes back to our point earlier about making sure that they're a partner in the process and they're included and not just a customer at the end that gets something that they may or may not use. And so there's an option here. And you'll obviously know when it's working when people stop chasing you. I mean, that's the basic of it. If people are chasing you for updates, if they're asking you what's going on in your team, if they're asking you what you're working on, then you're clearly not communicating consistently enough or clearly enough. And so a big piece here is to get on top of that so that you don't get that question.
Hey Pierre, so about the previous point, sorry, I
Yeah,
couldn't find
please.
the raise a hand button.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, so on this, actually, I resonate with this a lot And one thing I did in the past, and I love to hear your thoughts on it, is
Mhm.
when it comes to those regular update emails, I did one thing I did was actually kind of like a marketing email. I would give people the ability to kind of opt out.
Mhm.
Um, I also thought about more of like opt-in or like, do you guys, if you want to hear more about it, click on this button, that kind of idea. And then sometimes I would target my emails essentially, for example, if I have certain Power BI dashboards that I know like this 10, 12 people are using it, I
Mhm.
would send relevant details to those 10, 12 people and then essentially ask, hey, if you guys want to keep, subscribing to this kind of updates, or if you want to opt out, you can click on the button at the bottom.
Sure.
So how do you feel about that approach?
I'll say it depends. I don't mind the opt-in. The problem with that is that now you're creating kind of oh, well, you didn't opt in, therefore you didn't get the update. And or people may like, I didn't know I had to opt in or things like that. So I think there's a piece there. What I'd rather do is send out a much smaller update and say, hey, here's 2 lines. If you want more detail, click on the link and it'll take you to this like detailed report or the dashboard or whatever else it happens to be. So I'm still very much a big proponent of saying like try to blast it out to as many people as possible. If they want to get into more detail, dive in that way, then having people kind of follow up. Again, it's about reducing that friction. So if they have to sign up for something, that's the part that I start, especially internally with externals. If
Yeah,
you're sending out stuff out differently, maybe a different opinion, but internally I would keep it a short, small, sweet update, more details if you click on the link.
cool.
Yeah. But that's me. I think every company has their own kind of way of doing it. But what I do know is if you write more than like say 6 lines, people won't read the whole thing and they'll just leave it there, right? So you want people to kind of buy in. I talked a little bit a couple weeks ago about the idea of storytelling and the idea of starting off with like a kind of a hook or what we call the tension. So, hey, this is there's a $2.2 million opportunity for us, or we're currently losing 150K a week. If you want more details, click here. I mean, obviously you give more than that, but like you start off with something that goes, whoa, whoa, I'm interested. And then typically you'll start from there, and that's how you can get their attention. And then after that, if they want more details. Um, okay, credibility is next. So now, we started off with visibility, reliability. Now we want to be credible. So we've got visibility, we've got that reliability. We want to be credible. And part of this is about turning things into something that matters for them, right? You're now trying to get them to do an action off what you've shared. And so if you're just again sharing, here's a bunch of numbers and a bunch of data and good luck. I mean, most people don't have the mental capacity or the willingness to kind of decipher your secret messages. And so part of our job in order to build that credibility is that they want you to be a partner at the table with them. So it's not about being the smartest, but it's about making sure that you're speaking the language of what matters to them. Because if you are the smartest person, and we've all met these people, the incredibly smart, PhD level that speak, and you're like, wow, I have no idea what you just said. Yeah, you might think they're credible, but when it comes to for me to make a decision, I'm probably not going to listen to what they're saying because I don't really understand what they're talking about. Right. But if they put it in my language, in my context, with my priorities at mine, then now I'm like, okay, you're telling me if I do this, I get this outcome. Okay, now I'm interested. And so some things that we can do right away is lead with the so what. What is this impact? We can generate $120,000 more in revenue. We can increase our customer acquisition by 1,000 customers a week. Okay, now you're really kind of hitting me where it hurts, and where I'm willing to do something. And again, that in order to understand that, you have to know who you're talking to. So obviously, you need to understand your peers, because if I talk about customer acquisition to my head of product, he cares about that or she cares about that. But if I talk about that to my head of engineering or my partner in engineering, probably doesn't care as much, right? And so how do I translate that into something that they want to action on? That's a big part. So lead with that. So what? Translate. Part two is metrics. Use their words that matter to them. Everyone has an ego. Everyone has a goal. Everyone has a target to hit. And so if you speak about your objective in their words, then they see you as an ally, and they're probably more likely to bridge that gap. Show a range. Sometimes we put caveats at the end and we say, yeah, this is what I recommend, but there's some issues with the data, or we're not, the model is only at 92% accuracy, so, maybe it won't work. So obviously you can start off with, I always put the caveats up front, right? So they're not in a position of defense. You can start off with like, based on what we know today, this is the information we have. Again, you're speaking in their language, or hey, with the limited information we captured, or we looked at this much data, this is what's available. You're putting those up front so they're not at the end. So again, you've got them hooked. Don't give them a reason to back out. So start off with the information, give them a range if you have to, if you're not 100% sure, and give a direction at least. Tell the story. So, I talked about in the storytelling one from a couple weeks ago, it's stories. People will always create a story. And if you are the one that creates the story, then it's much better than them creating the story, because if you give them a bunch of numbers, they'll create a story that matters to them in their voice, and they'll drive it their way. But if you create a story and it aligns to what matters to them because you've created it, then you can have much more influence in that process. It's much more compelling when you give me a cause, an effect, an action than it is if you just tell me a bunch of numbers and say, what do you want to do, Pierre? Because then I'll be like, I don't know, like nothing. But if you give me a story about how, because of this, it's really impacting our business and we'll have to fire people. Okay, well, now I've got an interesting, compelling case. And then finally, bore their lens, point five, every week. You can ask these sort of questions. I do every so often. I'm not doing this every week, but every so often I said, like, look, how can I communicate better with you? What would you need to trust our insights more? How do you consume data? Things like that help me understand who they are as a stakeholder. Ultimately, influence is kind of playing a game, which is understanding them and communicating to them the way they want to. And so the more that I'm able to ask those questions about how they learn and read, some people, like I said, are auditory, some are visual, some need to play with it, some need to see it in action. So all these things are there. And so that'll help build the credibility. And then finally, once we've got the credibility, then we start talking about influence. And so this is kind of like this last piece. What we want to do here specifically is to get that flywheel to start moving. It's not about getting our way all the time, but it's about making sure that people are starting to drive in a certain direction. Sometimes that involves some compromise, but ultimately you're trying to influence slowly and gradually with time some of your insights. And so part one for me is about micro yeses. A lot of the times we say, hey, we need $200,000 or 6 months of time to get this thing across the line. No one's ever going to commit to that. It's the same that when you have a vendor approach you and says, give us $500,000 and we'll implement it in 6 months. As a data leader, you're kind of like, God, I don't know. Should I not? That's a big risk. That's a big thing. Same with the business. When you go to them and say, look, we found this insight, give us 3 months and we'll figure it out more or build something. Not so keen, right? And so for us here, it's about getting a little bit of buy-in. Can we test this? Can we try this out for a week? Can we just pick one customer stereotype and we can target them? Hey, can we just discuss one possible thing we could do next week? There's no reason to say no to that because it's a small ask. Now, they may not say yes because if you haven't done the other pieces enough, they may not say yes here, but start small. Frame the win in their language. Again, not my model works 10% better, but hey, you're going to drive this much more money. Your campaign will be more efficient. Hey, I can reduce our time to insight by X. That's going to allow you to drive more of Y. Make that collaboration low friction. So again, things that if you're saying, hey, I'm going to need you to come for a 6-hour meeting next week so we can kick it off. God, I'm not really interested in that. But is there a way to say, hey, I've already given you some of the tools. We can make this easy for your team to work with us. That's sometimes even if you're doing project intake or data intake, templates, easy, low friction, right? And make it clean and easy to work with each other. Show your progress publicly. So again, this is a big one. We often don't do this, but if you're working cross-functionally, you should be praising as much as you can your team, but also them, the other team. Thanks for playing with us. Thanks for partnering with us. Hey, it's great that you contributed to us. You're building that trust, that shared credit. So now they're like, hey, thanks for being involved with data and vice versa. And then where you can, Every time you get a small yes, it's just a little bit more. So keep tracking those small yeses and then use those to showcase the value you're creating. And so now you start to influence because, hey, remember that time you said yes, I delivered. I was credible, I was reliable, I was transparent with it. Remember that? Yeah, I remember that. Okay, great. They're like, yeah, Pierre did great on that one. So the next time I come up with them with some idea, they're more likely to say yes because I delivered on the last one. Right? And you'll start to know when it's working when you're starting to get invited to their, like they start to bounce these ideas off you. We're thinking about this next quarter. What do you think? Right? Hey, Pierre said in his last presentation this. I think you should pay attention to that. When they start kind of echoing or talking about you or shaping based on what you recommended, that's when you know that your influence is starting to work. And so that's our flywheel. And so when you think about just an example here, this is again a fictional example. I always talk about company X, our cat food company. But again, just this is something you might be able to take away, right? So in this example here, teams worked in silos. They only talked to each other when things broke. That's a common problem that we all face in our environment. Insights arrive late, or they were in a way that no one read them. So again, no one knew what to do. And then Piers described her updates as smart but disconnected, right? So it's, yeah, a lot of numbers, seems all very smart, but I don't really know what to do with them. And so if you use the framework that we talked about, you start a Monday morning signal, you start following up on meetings with a clear 2-line recap, you reframe some of your findings and things that matter to them. And then over time, with the influence, you start to share quick follow-ups and make sure that people are getting credibility, kind of like what we talked about. Then you'll start to see that impact at the end, that result. And so again, it's not really shifting too much of the actual work that we do. It's the same analysis, it's the same model, it's the same kind of working style. You're just kind of creating that system around it where you're more reliable, you're more transparent, you're more visible, you're more credible because of the way that you're speaking to them. Ultimately leads to more influence, and then that flywheel starts, and then you start to be more seen as a strategic, thoughtful data leader. And so my request this week, and if you think about it from your perspective, is how do you apply it this week? How do you turn the flywheel just once, right? That's all we want. We just want to turn it once this week. Is there something you can share? Is there some stakeholder you can reach out to early and just ask them for their input or thoughts on something that you're about to share in a couple of weeks or a project you're working on? Is there an update that you can commit to doing on a regular basis? Maybe talk to someone and say, hey, if I send you an update every Tuesday, would that be helpful for you? Right? And then start to kind of do that this week, continue it next week. Can you think about an analysis or any sort of communication that you're sending out that you can translate it into their language? Is there some sort of communication that you could just switch and make it more what I call know your audience, right? Is that something you can do this week to change that credibility? And then finally, can you do one small ask? Can you talk to one of your customers, one of your stakeholders, and ask just one thing related to data, related to a project where it's easy to say yes to, right? It could be something like, hey, can I bounce some ideas off you next week regarding this project? Right? And now you say yes. Okay, great. Obviously, next week, show up prepared, show up in a reliable state, speak it to them in their language, start that flywheel in that one-on-one meeting that you have with them. But that's how it starts. Little baby steps. And so every time you loop through, and as we wrap up here, every time you loop through this visibility, reliability, credibility, influence loop, that reputation of yours compounds. And when your reputation compounds, just like interest, you're going to get more and more and more influence. It will actually make your life much, much easier, and you'll start to see some of those benefits. So again, this is not something that you're going to do once and it's going to happen. This is something that I recommend that you do over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 months. But obviously, you got to start somewhere. All right. So pick one thing you can kind of chip away at and go from there. And so if you liked what you heard today, as I wrap up, we're launching our second cohort next week. Currently, we have about 7 people already registered, which is fantastic. But it's basically 3 days of a deeper dive into how to take it from data manager to AI ready leader. So feel free to scan the QR code. You'll get a 20% discount for being here today. And then if you have any questions, obviously reach out to me, and I'm happy to answer them about the course and the material that we're doing there. But we do a lot of what we kind of talk about here, which is how do you dive deeper into knowing your audience? How do you use AI to navigate change? How can you build an operating system that frees you up to become more strategic and have more time to drive the things that matter and not just be a manager managing people in your team? And so that's the presentation for today. Open to any questions if there's any.
Yeah, Pierre, I have a question.
Yeah, please.
I think one of the struggles that I feel, and a story that I'm telling myself, is that there's some tension between valuing quality versus optimizing for influence. And I know that that's like something I'm feeling scared of, and it isn't really the case. But can you talk a little bit about how we can be sure that we've got our quality value and we are getting this influence at the same time?
I mean, I see those as maybe I ask a follow-up. When you say quality versus influence, when you talk about quality, the quality of our work.
So you mentioned sometimes 70% is better than perfect. And so many of us, we really want to spend those 3 weeks developing a really perfect product. And I think that's because it's a value that we hold, that like data analysis should be done with care and accuracy and precision. And I'm just curious, like how you think about not viewing those as being intention, that doing these things that optimize for influence can be coherent with a care for quality and accuracy and
Yeah. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I mean I understand that more. I think that's inherently in our nature that we want to be perfect, right? We want to make sure that we've crossed every possible permutation or hypothesis and all those elements. But a lot of the times that actually loses us that credibility in the business because then, hey, Pierre doesn't get it. He's too slow, or Pierre looks at every single solution before he gives me anything. And part of that is that kind of ties into that sometimes again, it depends on the situation. If we're talking about numbers that we're going to release to the public in our next stock filing report, that's a very different thing than, hey, directionally, are we looking okay or not? And I think that that's the part that oftentimes we err on the side of, well, I want to make sure I'm perfect. I don't want to make any mistakes because that's how I'm going to lose credibility. But in reality, you lose credibility because you're too slow, too detailed. I don't know why he spent all that time doing that extra work that we didn't actually need. He doesn't understand our business. You see where that also compounds too, right? So I think as data leaders, we have to find that fine balance to say, okay, what are we trying to do with this? And is 70% good enough to just build that credibility to be seen as a partner with them? And then maybe that 70 becomes 80, 85, 90 later, but at least give me something to start the conversation with that way. So it's not a black or white in that one, but I think that that's something that we often don't think about is can I get them something at 70%, start a conversation at 70, build that trust and credibility with them, which leads to influence.
thanks.
Yeah, if I may chime in on that, actually, I think Pierre, you really captured it very, very well in your presentation earlier. Like the idea, I think you're trying to portray is that instead of sending out like a official like a professional sort of update saying, hey, this is what I think essentially it is. More is very few liners and then very casual sort of updates. And a lot of times, sometimes what I would like to do is kind of just, Teams private chats or Slack private messages, just keep things very casual and saying, hey, this is what I'm working on. And I love the fact that you use the word pattern because that's inherently saying, okay, this is inconclusive yet, right? But I see a pattern. I see something start forming. So that still leaves some level of ambiguity out. So that way, you don't give people that feeling that you're jumping to conclusion.
Yeah, I
Love
mean,
that.
my most influential relationships are the ones where I actually joke with them more than anything else. I have some sort of, it's not about, we often talk not about work, at least for 5 minutes, right? And again, it depends on how you build relationships, but I find that those ones, the ones where people know me as a human are the ones where people will give me benefit of the doubt when things don't go so well. Right. And I mean, I've got a stakeholder that I've worked with in the past where we did a really bad job of delivering actual value to them. But the guy would speak so highly of my team because of the personal relationship we had. And so he would like, ah, Pierre, I get it. I understand how this is. In reality, we're doing a really horrible job, right? But he was like, "Ah, all good, all good. I understand how it is." And now, if I felt that if I hadn't built that relationship with that individual, he would have been enemy number one. Now that's also kind of that's good and bad because you can also kind of get away with some stuff that you probably shouldn't in some cases. But that's my job as a leader now to make sure my team does their job properly because I've bought us a little bit more of that good grace and influence. And no, so then if I made a recommendation to them, they'd be like, yeah, okay, I believe you, I hear you, yeah, let's do that. And none of it had to do with the quality of the work. It had a lot to do with the fact that that person believed in me as a human and we had that relationship. So that's also part of it, right? And so you start off with the professional side, but if you can drop in a couple of tidbits of personal stuff every so often, and that's how that also helps. But just having a system where you're touching base with them is 90% of it. What you talk about is the 10. It doesn't really matter what you put in there. Again, depends on your audience, right? Some people, as you know, are very much like, give me the details, give me the bullets. Others are like, hey, what'd you do on the weekend? You went for a bike ride? That's awesome. How are the kids? Like, it doesn't matter what you talk to them about. The fact is, they remember you because you did talk to them. That's more important. When they haven't heard from you in 3 weeks, it doesn't matter what you talk to them. They haven't heard from you in 3 weeks. But when you talk to them every week, as long as you're not wasting their time. That's also the other line. Like this, like I said, it's all black, it's not black and white. There is a point where you like, hey, Pierre's wasting my time. Why is he asking me all the time about my family? So there's that fine line. But if you can find the consistent sweet spot, that's a great spot to be.
Yeah, I was just gonna comment. Yeah, I think that's great tips. But are you guys still doing that in Germany? I heard it.
Yeah, I mean, look, the
Curious
Germans,
how
I
that
mean,
can
they're
take place.
tough. They're tough on the outside, but once you break through them, and they're the most social butterflies you'll ever see. But you got to get through that first part. So, of course, at the start, you start off a little bit more formal, and then you chip away at the armor.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, actually, I mean, some of my better relationships are with my German stakeholders, to be honest, because once you get through that initial wall, it's go to town, right? It's a good time. Any other questions? Cool. Small group. I forgot today's Remembrance Day, so most of you are either potentially off work too. It's not a thing that we celebrate in Germany. Yeah. So I forgot about that actually when I booked it today.
We did it in the morning here, so
Uh,
I'm in the UK. So
okay, okay. I think
this
we
has
got
been very
three
helpful.
Canadians on the call and one in the UK. That's great.
Thank
You know, my target audience is the Berliners don't show up.
you.
Thank you,
Awesome.
Pierre.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Then
Yeah.
enjoy the rest of your evening, and thank you so much for coming.
You
Thanks,
too.
Pierre.
Thanks, Pierre.
See you guys.
Bye-bye.